that you don't have to be in control of everything, everyone, their schedules, that you don't have to control your environment to have peace, but that He Himself is the peace. Today, we are talking about anger and its little buddy frustration. You may not realize that anger is actually under the surface of many of your struggles. We're going to talk about identifying it and understanding the multitude of feelings that are actually associated with anger and knowing the root of anger so that you can know what to do with it in a God-honoring way. And I'm going to share 3 ways that trusting God in very specific and unique ways will actually help you manage anger. I haven't done an episode like this one before, so make sure you grab your notebook and something to take some notes. If you're tired of being frustrated, feeling out of control, and struggling to regulate your emotions, and you desire peace and calm in the midst of your chaos, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the She Lives Resilient podcast. I'm Misty McFadden, wife, mom of 4 from Tots to Teens, and Christian life coach. You can create the stability you've always wanted using simple self-coaching tools, biblical truth and application, and deep emotional healing and growth. If you're ready to use your emotions to your advantage as you build your life on the only truth, God's Word, then grab yourself that sneaky snack and let's dive in. Really quick before we get started, if you are enjoying this podcast and you are loving being intentional about walking in God's peace and creating the calm day-to-day life that you want, would you take a minute and leave a review? This helps me to know that you're finding this podcast helpful, and it also helps it be found by others. So pause this episode and leave a quick review. Today we are talking about anger. You would be surprised how often I hear that clients deal with anger, and it's no surprise. This is something that is probably one of the biggest emotions that I wrestle with, and it's why I talk so much about it here. Dealing with anger and frustration as, a busy mom is pretty common. And, over the past few years, dealing with things like hormonal imbalances, just a lot of life transitions, managing a busy household, and, trying to work a little bit from home to make some money to help support my family. Often we can feel pretty spread thin. And so I wanted to talk about this today because I hear about this a lot from women just like you, wrestling with anger and then feeling guilty after the fact. And, I know for me, I get really frustrated on a daily basis for many different things. And so, I've learned to manage this and coach myself through it using godly biblical principles that I teach my clients and that I talk about here on this podcast. But not everybody has those tools. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today because it's something that comes up, and it came up this morning. And so I wanted to just share with you a little bit about the root of anger. Now, I wrestle with taking my frustrations out on my family, and I know you do too, and that tends to cause guilt. I woke up this morning and realized that, the evening chores hadn't been done, and that's not uncommon, but I have let it go for a couple of weeks where, the kids just are not taking care of their responsibilities, and they know what they're supposed to be doing, and they're just not doing them. I've reminded them multiple times, and it's just not getting done. And so I get frustrated and I get angry. And instead of just controlling myself and managing my own emotions, I blew up and I nagged them. And, I hate doing that because if you have teenagers, you know that doesn't go anywhere. So it really is not helping the situation. It's not enabling them to do better. It's just causing them to really pull away. So taking my frustrations out on my family causes fractures in my relationships. And I know it does the same for you. And there are so many implications to anger. And the most concerning one for me, like I mentioned, is my relationship with my kids being negatively affected. And I think that's what anger does, is when we don't get a handle on anger and the feelings associated with anger, it will cause fractures in our relationships. And I know you don't want that. Anger is not good for you. On a physical level, it can cause so many issues and stress to your body, and that is the last thing you need. I know you have enough stress. The first thing I want to talk to you about today is that you have to understand anger and all of the feelings associated with anger. Now, the definition of anger is, according to the internet, is a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. Now, I don't have to tell you what anger is. You know what anger is. But did you know that there are other feelings or states associated with anger? You probably don't know this, and you haven't heard a lot about this. So I'm going to read off to you some other feelings associated with anger. Some feelings associated are feeling betrayed, resentful, disrespected, made fun of, violated, furious, jealous, provoked, annoyed, withdrawn, numb, skeptical, dismissive, taken advantage of, let down, humiliated, bitter, mad, aggressive, frustrated, distant, and critical. Now, that was a pretty exhaustive list, and I really just want you to think about those for a minute and think about how often some of those feelings you associate just with what you're going through. And did you realize that anger is at the bottom of those? You may not realize it's anger you're dealing with. So identifying the feelings associated with it can definitely help. Knowing these can help you identify that anger and can help you to be more intentional with seeing it when it rises up or catching it before it kind of blows up. And that's what we want to do here is we want to slow the roll. It's one thing to have a trigger and blow up. It's another thing to have a trigger and really just be able to recognize it and change the way you respond. And that's what emotional regulation is. And that's why I talk about this so much. Doing this in turn will help you manage it in an intentional, God-honoring way when it does happen, because it will. We are emotional beings. Emotions are going to happen. You'll be able to name what's going on, and you'll be able to hold that to the Word of God and dig into scriptures that talk about anger in a more intentional way now that you know that that's what this is. You can ask yourself, what is going on? Why did I react that way? You can get curious about it instead of going to guilt and beating yourself up. The second thing I want to talk about is understanding the root of your anger. Now, this is different for everybody, but like I mentioned before, you want to just ask yourself what's going on. Get curious about it. Oftentimes, the way that we respond to certain situations can be out of patterns we've developed since childhood. So, doing work with a coach or a counselor and figuring out maybe some of those things can be very helpful. A lot of times, what I see with clients and with myself is that anger arises when you feel out of control. Like, not that you're flying off the handle, but you are feeling like you are not in control of the situation, you're not in control of your life, and you're not doing the things that you should be doing. For an example, your kids aren't doing what you want them to do no matter how many times you've asked. Your husband keeps doing that thing that he knows annoys you. And in turn, you may feel like you don't matter or you don't have what it takes to do what you're doing. Do you feel like you're being taken advantage of? Do you feel like you're being controlled? Start to pay attention to what you're feeling. Knowing what is at the root of your anger will just give you more awareness, and it will help you to understand if maybe some of those things are based on patterns that you developed from childhood. Like if you tend to feel like what you say or do doesn't matter, I want you to think back to when you were younger. Was that the case then? Is this a pattern of feeling, a pattern of reacting, and a pattern of thinking? Just knowing those things will help you be able to manage it better. You'll be surprised how often that same root comes up in other areas of your life over and over in other reactions and interactions with others. And once you're aware of it, then you have the power to do something about it. So what is that doing something about it? Once we know what it is, we can pray specifically. We can be more intentional about managing it. We can learn to stop ourselves when we start to feel it rising up. We can bring it to the Lord and surrender. There's so many different things you can do. You can journal it out. You can bounce this back and forth with your Christian life coach or counselor or mentor, or whoever it is that you have walking along with you, supporting you in this growth. Now, the third thing I want to talk to you about is what you're here for. How does trusting God help? And I have 3 ways for you, plus a bonus fourth. So the first way that trusting God helps is that trusting God means trusting in His control of all things. That you don't have to be in control of everything, everyone, their schedules, that you don't have to control your environment to have peace, but that He Himself is the peace. Second, trusting God means trusting His guidance to help you in the situation. You don't have to figure everything out. Everything does not depend on you, no matter how much you try to convince yourself that it does. God is with you, God is helping you, and God is guiding you in your decisions and choices. You just get to choose to believe it. Third is that trusting God means trusting Him to bind up the hurt that you face when you've been taken advantage of or betrayed. God is the God who sees. He is with you and He holds you. You can trust Him to strengthen you, to be more confident in Him, and to be less at the mercy of others and their sometimes out of control emotions. That's what being resilient is all about. It's about shoring yourself up so that when others fly off the handle, you're less affected. You can trust Him to help you build resilience in Him. You don't have to be at the mercy of others' emotions. And I have a bonus for you. Trusting God means trusting that His word and His ways are best when He calls you to forgive. When someone upsets you or offends you, we're called to forgive. And part of that means accepting the consequences of other sins. And I know that's not easy, but we can trust God and we can trust that He's with us and that He knows what is best for us. So I have a little bit of heart work for you today. And I want you to get out your journal and just take a few minutes to do this. I want you to journal out a situation that you feel angry about. Write out all of the facts. Who, what, where, when, how. Write out the thoughts that you had about that and how it made you feel. Based on those thoughts and feelings, how did you respond? What was the result? Are you happy about it? How can you bring the Lord into this situation? Where might growing and trusting God help? And what feels confusing to you? Write out a prayer that you have for this and make it a point to bring that to God. Heart work is not the easiest work, but it is the most valuable work. And so as we wrap up today's episode and recap, I want to remind you that it is important to understand anger and the feelings associated with anger. It's equally important to understand yourself and how you uniquely operate in anger. That is why I stress becoming aware of your emotions, because we're all different. You need to understand the root of your anger. The root cause for your anger can be very different for different situations, so make it a point to get curious about what is going on each time so you can better understand yourself and where God is calling you to yield your emotions to Him. And how does trusting God help? Trusting God means trusting in His control and sovereignty of all things. Trusting God means trusting His guidance to help you in the situation, not leaning on your own understanding. That good old Proverbs 3:5-6. Trusting God means trusting Him to bind up the hurt you face when you've been taken advantage of or hurt. Trusting God means trusting that His word and His ways are best when He calls you to forgive, because forgiving means accepting the consequences of another's sin. And remembering that God walks alongside you And He has something for you in this, and you are not alone. If you would love some support navigating frustration and anger in your life, and you want to do that biblically, then working with me one-on-one as your Christian life coach is the next best step. I'd love to come alongside you, pray over you, and help you partner with God in this area. You can find out more about working with me by going to www.mistymcfadden.com and clicking the Work With Me tab at the top. I hope you found this episode helpful. I'll see you back here Thursday. Thanks for listening. I hope this episode encouraged you and challenged you. If it did, would you take 30 seconds to share it with a friend who may be blessed by it? Also, leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts so other Christian women can find it. I can't wait to connect with you next time and see what God does as we intentionally grow a remarkable legacy for Christ together. Because remember, what we do day in and day out, no matter how messy, matters for eternity.